had the potential to be great Google employees, like it might prove that they might have the largest population size in that company. Like if they had, I'm not saying that this is the truth about how they choose their employees, but I'm saying if that is the case and they're only targeting white and Asian employees because they think that they're going to be the best and they never even gone about, then that's the other way that they're not finding the best.
And that was a really nice way of putting exactly what I was trying to say here, which is these companies are trying to get the best people. Like there's no doubt, it's not like Google, I don't think Google's consciously thinking that person is black, we shouldn't hire them. It's just that because of a combination of socioeconomic factors, which make it harder for people of certain demographic groups, which very often have overlap with racial groupings, to succeed, and also because of the ways that people are like applying and looking at names and jobs, the fact is that these biases creep in. And so instead of getting the best people, Google gets the people who they think are the best people, which very often are people who just also adhere to their expectations of what a good IT person looks like. And so that's one issue of it. Now on the other side, consequences that come later. What are some of the negatives? Like we'll talk about race now and then we'll do gender after the break. That'll just divide more nicely. With consequences, what are the potential worries about having your workforce be so much differently aligned than with the general population? What are some potential worries that come up?
Professor, I didn't mean to do this, but I brought the memo of James Damore. For this reason, I found it, I think, a good piece that will, I think, satisfy you. Neither side is 100% correct, and both viewpoints are necessary for a functioning society, or in this case, company. A company too far to the right may be slow to react, overly hierarchical, and not trusting of others. In contrast, a company too far to the left will constantly be changing, deprecating much loved services, diversify its interests, ignoring or being ashamed of its core business, and overly trust its employees and competitors.
Yeah, so here's the idea, is if you have a company who is entirely people that look the same and have the same views, the company as the whole is going to miss out on a lot of viewpoints, and the culture is going to be such that certain important views aren't going to be taken into account. And on the one hand, that's just problematic where like the business, it's like for people who don't have those views, it's negative, but also it's bad for the company themselves, because if you only are looking, if your entire workforce looks the same and has the same views, and your culture is such that you're only working towards the things that the people in your company think are a good idea, you are missing out on a huge huge population of potential customers who have different views or different interests. Like if Google's only appealing to a certain demographic, anyone who's not of that demographic is going to be less likely to buy Google's products. And so that is one thing, is if you have everyone with the same viewpoints, you very often have a very skewed and biased way of approaching things. So just getting more viewpoints in opens up the sorts of like viewpoints and the ideas that become available. So, for instance, like if you there are certain sorts of examples. So this was an example that came up to me where I was like, I just saw it and thought like, they didn't have someone in the room who actually had any idea about this. So one time I saw a like autism like awareness sign, a thing of like, here, be aware of autism, this many people have it, let's be respectful, let's be aware, learn about it here. It was advertising on the side of a garbage truck. On the one hand, you think like, oh good, garbage trucks go everywhere, but also like there was nobody in the room who was like, you know that's a really strong, like those unintended messages that people with autism belong on the side of garbage trucks, like no one paused to think about that. Because there was probably no one there who was especially aware of mental health deciding where to put these advertisements. In the same way, if you have a company of all people with the same background, you're not going to have the person in the room who stands up and goes, you know that's going to be offensive to like half of our customers, right? And so these are the sorts of things that you can see. That's one advantage. And tied in with this, what are some others? What are some other issues with having a very like just demographically homogeneous workforce, especially in things like tech? Who's in charge of programming? Who does it? Programmers, which are what? Project managers, all of which are what? And I'm asking for the most basic general answer to this.
People.
Human beings. Human beings are computer programmers. Remember what I said back here about human beings having biases and norms and other sorts of things? Well, one issue is that programmers cannot help but have these things affect their programming. And not in ways that are intentional, it's just like certain sorts of things will be tested, or certain sorts of ideas will be come up with, and nobody will have a different viewpoint to go, oh, that's a bad idea. So for instance, remember when I was talking a few weeks back, I mentioned this? What is one of the major issues with facial recognition technology right now? It's going everywhere. It's being used for so many different things. If you want to get into a casino, you will have your face like scanned and checked against a whole bunch of databases to see if you cheat at casinos. They're thinking about using it for, there's some talk about using it for like building entry. There's your phone doing it. There's all these sorts of things that rely on facial recognition technology. But there's some major issues with facial recognition technology. What are some of the major issues? Is it 100% accurate? No. Who does it work really, really well for? Yeah, Asian and white males. Who's it really bad for? Black women. It can't tell, if you give most facial recognition software Oprah and Michelle Obama, it won't be able to tell them apart. It's just not good at identifying minority faces and telling them apart. And part of the reason why, almost certainly, is when they were designing the technology, the people they were testing it on were probably in the office. And if you're at Google, most of the people you're trying it on are going to be white and Asian people. And also on top of this, most of your consumers in the first rollout are going to be white and Asian. And if it's working very well for them, you're not going to get any calls of complaints. It's not until it starts rolling out and doing things like being used to find somebody who committed a crime in the inner city, and then it gets it wrong, that you start to realize, like, oh wait, our facial recognition software isn't working. We keep misidentifying criminals because we are only good at identifying white upper middle class males. And then you start to realize, like, oh, this is starting to be a really big issue. There was another one. This is one I actually found last week, so I want to talk about it a little more. And this was it's a program used by hospitals. And the way this program works is it's designed, you put in a patient's information, and then it tells you how likely is this person to need extra care. So basically, when you go to a hospital and you get your necessary stuff, they want to know, are you likely to need extra care? Is it likely that you're just generally have a lot of health problems, and therefore we should keep extra monitoring on you and make sure that we're ready in case something happens to you. So like that's a very nice thing, like it's a thing which we think of hospitals, like hospitals should have this. If you have a little old lady who's had 3 strokes in the past year come in with like a cut toe, you want to make sure that you know she's had these 3 strokes and you're ready in case something goes wrong. And if you have somebody who like cut their finger off, but they're like 18 and have never had a health problem in your life, you don't need to be ready on hand and devote important resources to this person. All right. So that's what this program is designed to do, and it was designed by this company which would look over the data. So this is all it's designed to do, and it's a great idea, and we look at it and we're like, okay, that's a good idea. But here's the problem. How are you going to tell with an algorithm, like the whole point of this program is to make it go faster so that you don't need a doctor to look over their chart and say, oh yeah, this person's risky. Because that takes time and effort, and doctors are busy people. So what does it do? They tried to find a way of looking at the chart itself to tell whether this person was a risk. And a computer isn't smart enough to look over all the health concerns. Like, computers aren't smart enough yet. So it found a quick and dirty way of just judging who's more likely to need more. Does anyone have a guess of how they decided who was more likely to need more health care?
On the racial basis?
It wasn't racial. It was not explicitly racial. They didn't look and be like, oh, this person is this race. It was rather money. What they looked at was how much in the past year has this person spent on medical care. If this person has spent a lot of money on medical care, then they've probably had a lot of health problems. If they haven't spent much money, then they probably haven't had a lot of health problems. So that was the way they were doing it. What's the obvious issue with this?
Like if you have a health problem, you have a health problem. It's not. It shouldn't be a matter of.
So here's.
Like if I get hit by a car tomorrow, then.
So, but the idea would be, so So the idea is like, so I want to separate two things. One is why it actually is that, and others is things like, so yeah, if you come in and you haven't, no, to be clear, this is the sort of thing, like if you came in with a broken leg because you just got hit by a car or you're in a coma, they're going to give you all the attention you need. It's rather, if you come in with something small or something medium, should they be ready on hand, assuming that you might get worse because something bad has happened?
I mean, no, but I'm saying like at the same time though, like they shouldn't be like assessing your health risk or your health, like the worth of your health based off how your previous health records. Like,
Yeah, so that's one issue, but also just like, what else? So there are multiple things which determine how much money you're going to spend in the past year on health care. One reason is definitely how healthy or how sick you are. So if you are very healthy, you almost certainly didn't spend any money. But if you are sick, you probably spent more on average. But that's not the only reason that people don't spend money on health care. That's another issue, is they don't have the money to spend. So what did this program consistently do over and over and over? And it did not explicitly say, is this person white, therefore we need to give them special attention? Or is this person black, therefore we need to give them special attention? But what they found is over and over again, when people had the exact same health problems and basically the same history, it kept saying the white person is likely to need more care and the black person is not. And why did it keep doing this? Well, because on average, the black person had a lower income, and that was flagged as, oh, they spent less money in the past year on health, therefore they're less likely to have needed care. When really what it was just like, no, on average, unfortunately in the United States, white people on average make more than black people, therefore they have more money to spend on medical care, which means that this program was using the fact that white people are richer to judge that white people are more likely to need extra care, and important resources were going to whites instead of blacks, simply on the basis of these like economic factors tied in with race.
So like it was super easy to see the not the loophole, but like the problem with this program. Why does stuff like this get out?
So the issue, one of the reasons is, if you are somebody who's upper middle class, and all the people you spend your time with are upper middle class, and none of you has ever had the problem of needing to go to the doctor and not being able to afford it, then you aren't necessarily going to realize, like, oh, this is terrible. Like, it can make it through if you've got a very homogeneous group of, like, quality control, and people who are working in, like, cramped timetables, working hard. Like, the fact is, people make mistakes. And the best way to make sure that these mistakes don't get out is getting a group of people, each of whom are coming from a different direction and are likely to pick up the mistakes that others miss. So for instance, in this case, my guess is amongst the people who designed this program, all of them were well enough off that it didn't even cross their mind that one reason why people wouldn't have a lot of money being spent on healthcare is literally they couldn't afford it. Because in their social circles, that isn't something which is salient to them, and because they were busy and working hard and trying to do, they were attempting to do something good. But the issue was that because of this, it led to these downstream problems. And so I think it's that sort of thing, and that's one of the consequences of having these sorts of biased programs. Another one that made news a few years ago was there was this program that was designed, you give a survey to somebody who's just been charged with a crime, and you tell them, please fill this out, and then it spits out a score which says how likely is this person to commit a crime again in the future. And why do we have this, like, what is the idea behind this system? Why do we want something like this? What is the good reason for motivating it? Why do we want a system that can allow us to better predict who's going to commit another crime and who's going to only commit one in their life? What's the benefit?
One reason is to reduce recidivism, and second is to reduce the prison population.
Yeah, so here's the thing, if you could, now, I know this is an impossible thing, but imagine you had somebody who could just look at a criminal and go, I can tell 100% certainty they're never going to commit a crime again. Like, imagine we had, like, somebody who, like a psychic who could predict the future perfectly. That would be a really useful, well-paid person, because they'd be able to say, we can punish this person for a little bit of time, and then we let them out, and there'll never be a problem again. So what they tried to do was design a program that basically did this. And who started getting their hands and using this program? Anyone know? Judges. Judges started using this program because they used it to decide how long should people go to jail. If they saw that this person was very likely to commit another crime, they'd give them a longer jail sentence. If they found out that this program told them this person's not likely to commit another crime, they give them a shorter jail sentence, which works perfectly well in theory. However,
it kind of works both ways. It's like a double-edged sword. It's like you could do that and reduce the amount of people that's going to jail, but then you could also be overlooking the fact that some people are going to commit crime, and some people that have committed a bunch of crimes, like the most heinous of murders, could have gone right with God, like right after, and never wanted to commit murder again. And the person who you thought would never do it again, is like, yes, I got him.
Yeah. So there's one major issue. It's just this is really hard. Like this is not something which is easy. This is why I'm imagining someone. So if you come up with a computer program to do this, it better be a damn good computer program. Because there's a lot of things that we cannot predict, and there are a lot of people who do terrible things and spend a lot of time in prison and then get clean and come out and never do anything bad again in their life. And like the worst thing they do is show up 5 minutes late to like help out children, which they've now devoted their life to. Like, and then there's other people who like do a small crime and like it passes under the radar and do it again. But the other major issue was, well, when they started looking at this program and seeing what it was doing, it was highly, highly racist. And what it kept doing was significantly over-predicting black people as more likely to commit another crime and white people as less likely than they actually were. And the issue was, the questions in the questionnaire, none of them asked about race. But the way the questions were worded ended up being strongly correlated in a data mining sort of sense with what race someone was. So if it was like sorts of things, the questions were like really bizarre things too, like things like, is it ever right to hit someone when you get mad? And it's just like, with all of these, it ended up like giving people different answers. And you look at this stuff and you're like, how on earth did it get to the point that this is literally deciding how long you should be in jail? And yet it gets used in states. And the technology is just like implicitly racist. And people might, like the programmers of this program, they were trying to do something good. Like, let's be clear, they were not trying to be racist, they were not trying to discriminate, they were trying, but the fact was, because of the way in which they had biases, and different people of different groups have different biases, and likely because the programs were such that they were being written by people of a very particular demographic group, you ended up with all of these questions spitting out answers, and you ended up with these things that were just like deeply racist towards potential criminals.
I think that's another thing. There's another issue with like race though. Is like because this is like, or like a lot of things that are social constructs is because they're social constructs. It's like because they're not an actual thing. The way you describe them and like it's because like the way what I'm trying to say is like there's always gonna be a loophole because like if you're talking about something that is a social construct and you talk about it in a way like you can always just okay like all right, so instead of being racist or talking about black people, I'm just gonna say, people that don't have this amount of income, like you can directly correlate that with social constructs as opposed to anything else, because you can talk about a social construct as the actuality of it, but you can also talk about it theoretically, and in theory, say like, I'm not gonna do anything for anybody that falls into all these categories, and then all of a sudden, that's every black person.
That's an amazing way of putting it, which is that what part of the problem with these is they never look for a social construct, they just ask questions about all these other things, which just so happen to be the things which are strongly correlated with the social construct. And so what you end up doing is the only way to prevent this is like, so this question was going to ask things like, what was your family's income level growing up? And that is strongly correlated with race numbers. Or like, where did you grow up? That's strongly correlated with race. Or like, how many siblings did you have growing up? That's strongly correlated with socioeconomic class. So those sorts of things. And what ends up happening is you don't have somebody who's aware, like if somebody isn't aware of all the tie-ins between these social constructs like race and these more like concrete numbers like socioeconomic status and education level and name and these sorts of things, what you end up having is people writing these programs for good, where if somebody looked at it from a different perspective would look and be like, oh no, you're just testing for race right here. But no one's coming along and doing that because you don't have a diverse enough workforce to look at it and go, oh yeah, this is definitely problematic. Or what ends up happening very often is a judge looks at this and they're just told, oh, this is going to work great. And they don't understand programming. They don't understand this. They just see like a black box that says, this will tell you how likely this person is to commit a crime. And this judge who's overworked and just, doesn't want to have to do this, takes it and goes, all right, great, let's use it. And so you have this other issue of just this like assumption that if it's being made by Google or it's being made by this company and they promote it to you, it will work. And because people don't understand the tech, or they don't understand how these algorithms work, and very often, like, the companies refuse to tell you what their algorithms are because it's like proprietary information. So if you've got this algorithm that's spitting out racist answers, they're not going to tell you what it is, and it's definitely going to be things like socioeconomic class and all these other things where, like, it's not explicitly looking, but until you have somebody who comes into the room and goes, you realize you're testing for race, right? Because all these things are correlated with that, and you're just writing a racist program. Until somebody comes along, that's not going to happen. And the more homogenous and less like mixed a group of workers is, the more likely that's going to happen.
Yeah, like another thing kind of makes you think of is like when you play in that game, that's what number I'm thinking of, and like you're like, all right, so it's a number between 1 and 10. It's more than 5.
Mm-hmm.
But it's less than 7. Like, you would know it's 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if I said, like, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100.
Yeah.
It's like.
Yeah. And it's just like a mathematics thing in which, like, the way these questions get asked and the way they get spit out, they're not designed to cause people harm, but they are because there's nobody going, like, you don't have somebody coming along and being like, you do realize that by saying not this and not this, you're just saying that other one. All right, so let's pause here for a minute and take our break. Come back at 12:35, and then we'll talk about gender in tech. And it's a lot of the same sorts of issues, but there are other components as well that are worth talking about. All right, we're going to take the break. And for those of you who missed the beginning of class,